Nice castle you have there. It'd be a shame if somebody transmuted it. Hello and welcome back. My name is Sean and today we are diving back into the Spellmonger universe with book 3, Magelord. Now, sorry this took a bit longer to get out than usual. I actually had filmed it over a month ago. But it was during the moving times and my mic quality was so bad that I didn't want to have happen what it did with Cradle. Instead just decided to reshoot it, but because I was continuing on with my TBR and doing other reviews, it took me a while to have some time to circle back and bring this back. But with Knights Magi coming up, I wanted to go back and make sure I had this video out before I tainted what I remembered about Magelord with another book in the series. To give you guys a general overview, I'm going to stick to the same type of formula that I have been doing with this series. Give a little bit of a spoiler-free take on the book, go into the book spoilers, and talk about how it relates to the greater series at large. Now, since we're getting to book 3, the non-spoiler section are going to get smaller and smaller and smaller, and at some point I'm just not even going to do that other than say it's good or bad and then just move on with my life.
It's good. It's good. It's good.
To get things started, I really like this book. The first 2 books were really good at kind of setting up the stakes, starting to introduce the political intrigue, show the giant scope of the force, and start introducing a lot of concepts. With Spellmonger Honeymoon, you start to see a wider path at large, and it really lets you know some of the size of the conflict and show some of the hidden moving pieces and plots that are happening behind the scenes. And if you haven't read the Spellmonger's Honeymoon and you're thinking about trying to read this book, or maybe you read this book, seeing my take on it and haven't read it, I'd highly recommend going back and reading it. I hadn't read it on my first read through, and a lot of things that you don't see for much later on in the series are present, and it's a pretty short, fun read to go into. And I think really highlights Min's character and his relationship with his wife. It was just a fun read. I did a review on it, so feel free to check that out. Magelord, I think, does a very good job at introducing what the rest of the series is going to be, and starts to show some things that Terry Mancour will do later on. In one of his blog posts, he talks about how in order to keep things fresh, he will mix and play around with different genres. So this one, you start diving more into the progression of civilization building, showing some of the power that is being accrued by men, and how he actually will interact with feudal politics. And overall, I really enjoyed it. Later on in the series, you will see this type of story, but just on a much, much greater scale. But I think just with how this book handled the initial men taking a break from the war and just starting to really build things up, along with some of the conflict and resolution that happens later on in the book that I'll talk in my spoiler section. Overall, it was a great time. And something that was interesting that happened was that because I had read up till like book 14 or 15 in the series, I had a lot jumbled in my head with when I thought certain things happened, because so much happens, and things that I didn't think were going to be introduced to books 5 or 6 were actually present in this book. So much happens in the Spellmonger universe. You start to see all these moving pieces really come together, and I think in Magelord it does a really good job. So if you have not checked this book out and you're on the fence, continue to check it out. I know that book 4 will be contentious for some people, and as we get later on and more experimental with some of the genres, which I love, then there might be, not your cup of tea or whatever, but I think up until this point that if you like books 1 and 2, you'll love book 3. And if not, this is when you start really digging into the world and sort of the progression building that will happen that I personally really enjoy. Now, getting into book specific spoilers, I really enjoyed this book, and I did for a few different reasons. There are a lot of things that happen in this book that I thought would happen later on, and they are major pivotal plot points that will be endlessly explored as the series progresses. Now, one of my favorite themes of this book was men's looming fatherhood.
Okay, let's take a deep breath. No matter what happens, we'll be fine.
Do you mean that?
No.
He has finally gotten a little bit of a respite from the war. He has his rewards from the Duke, and he is now a landed noble. So we get to see what men can actually do with Irier Knight and acting as a Magelord. We get to see that civilization building where he goes from a very rundown, very poorly managed little sect of land, and just from basically starting from probably less than neutral, has to rebuild it up with magic, and it really gets to showcase a lot of Min's character, his personality, and how he actually will handle the fact that he's going to be a ruler. Now, there is a lot of similarities between this and his living fatherhood, but the fact that he's constantly panicking about being a father while simultaneously raising the village and trying to be the caretaker for everyone else. I thought that was a pretty cool dynamic interplay between the two. But my favorite thing about this book, because while there is action and there is a lot of cool stuff that happens later on, it's more of like seeing magic used in innovative ways. I've seen too often that you'll have a magic system that is solely focused on combat, and some of the applications you see there don't really get reapplied back into the daily life of everyone else. The Spellmonger, I think, stands out in the fact that, you get to start from a pretty much medieval society and you get to see that growth happen, because generally it's like, hey, we already have a magical society with this magic built into it, and a lot of hand waving goes in because you don't actually explore the dynamics or how they got set up. But in this case, we are going from literal like medieval pig farmers and cheese farmers into seeing what happens in that transformation of a magocracy. And for me, that was a lot of fun. I've always enjoyed progression fantasy, and while yes, there is a lot of just personal power that you will see accrue to a lot of these characters, you don't often see where someone has to start out with basically nothing in a landed sense or political power, and then just grow that and also progress around there. There are elements of that in certain lit RPGs, but generally, I think they always get over the top and they are encumbered by bad writing or a whole host of other issues. If I ever dive into certain series I will not name, I'll bring it up then, but that would be burning a couple bridges. But Terry Mancourt is a very good writer, so I like the way that he handled this progression and growth. Now, one of the biggest things that happened in there that is just pivotal for the rest of the series was his transformation of his castle into Snowstone. A lot of things happen there where he's like praying to the gods. He has his like son that is manifesting as Rogera like way too early, and then just with a weird mix of certain events and stuff, he winds up introducing a brand new magical element into the world that even the powerful Alcalalon don't know anything about.
Question for you. What are those?
I forgot that this happened this early in the series, but seeing how some of this power progression's happening, Snowstone basically makes your magical resistance around you to 0. So one big issue you see with a lot of progression fantasies is that if you keep heaping power and power and power onto a certain character, the stakes kind of get lessened, and it's like eventually you have that Dragon Ball Z problem where you only can save the world so many times before it becomes bland.
Well, this is it. I hope you're not disappointed.
By introducing concepts like Snowstone, where you're not directly influencing the power of a mage perhaps, but you're able to put in these like creative elements that will effectively boost the power of everyone there, but with like preparation. It's just a nice little touch where rather than just like, hey, here's your brand new power and moves you can do, it's like, hey, you can apply this new concept to a new dynamic situation to great effect. So I really enjoyed that. And a portion of this book too, where there is finally a head-to-head culmination of a fight with the Censorate. So up until now, we see just from years of kind of history and culture that most mages are terrified of the Censorate. But while all of our war mages have been off fighting the goblins and stuff, there wasn't really a direct head-to-head. In the last book, we had Menelin sort of going into a political battle with the Censor General. In this book, we finally get to see what happens with a mage with Erionite goes against the non-augmented Censorate. And it's kind of funny because they're doing traditional classic things where they're having an epic sword battle or using whatever like quick magic they can throw up there, until eventually, Min realizes, hey, I have godlike power in this stone right now, why am I doing this? And it just like lifts everyone up. Kind of a cool, satisfactory moment because we've spent 2.5 books really building up how terrifying the Censorate are and how like they are just always looking in the shadows, and there's this general fear around them and how they interact with, the hedge mages, spellmongers, and everyone else from top to bottom, just to have that new kind of dynamic in the new shifting world just completely smack them in the face. With almost no effort, Menelin was able to just take on all of them and just like say like, hey, we're not going to do this. And, with this book being the first kind of introduction to mage lords and showing like how the whole like dynamic has completely shifted, I thought that was a very cool little shift, because up until that point, that's when Menelin starts getting momentum in this little kingdom, starts implementing a lot of cool things, and it's like, hey, we're in a new world now. Things are about to change. Now, the other major things that I really enjoyed about this book is that while Menelin is trying to build up his new order, his new kingdom, deal with all the power that Hayes been heaped upon there, we have a very petty and just small lord on his borders that is trying to bully him around and is so used to the status quo that he's just trying to pick a battle with someone that he really shouldn't be.
Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
And his conflicts with the warbird and everything else I thought was pretty cool, because while you have this little irritation stuff and men trying to figure out the new order, he is also trying to deal with the mess that is, the war is still going on. At no point is that forgotten. They're not waiting around for him to come back to the battlefield. He is constantly getting updates while he's trying to relax and set up his domain and order, that goblins are still here. They're still progressing. There's still a lot of things happening that is terrifying, like the introduction of dragons and how they are completely messing things up. And you're seeing him having to deal with the political ramifications of that. Another area that I think is explored very well, because a lot of times you just have the hero that has to swoop in and deal with it, or it's like the setup mainly is like, oh, we're gonna ride off to battle and confront it. But I haven't seen a lot of books where it's like you're dealing with the actual political intrigue, where they're not doing anything, but they have to at least show that they're aware of the problems and dealing with the giant political quagmire that is running your own order, and definitely this new status quo. But you had a lot of satisfaction there as you're seeing his kingdom build up, and once he gets to a certain part, you just see what happens with Magelord's put on the loose, and just the kind of savvy way that they handled it. Menelin could have gone in there just all firestorm and ice like he did with the goblins, but instead you see him using wit and guile and the resources at hand. It was a very satisfactory thread kind of looping through this. Having that culminate too in them going to Barabel and finally figuring out a way to repel the dragon with the help of Snowstone. This book, I would say 1/3 of it's him building up his little new kingdom, 1/3 is him dealing with the political ramifications of him having a kingdom and a new order, and the last third, of course, is the action-packed deal of him finally using that new power, that new position, and then still having the battle with the goblins and showing how the war is changing. During with, we're seeing that the goblins are learning and adapting too, so they're not a stagnant enemy. Shirul is doing a lot of cool things, setting up a lot of pieces and stuff that will pay off in the future. And hey, they finally have to slay a dragon, and in a very, very, very epic scene that I won't go into minute detail about, you get to see, them starting to pull their resources and figure some cool stuff out. And lastly, one of the reasons why I think I really enjoyed this book is there are a lot of small moments in here that really showcase Men's personality, the character of the world, and just little things that why I like Terry Mancour as a writer. I have 2 favorite scenes in here that weren't related to any of the epicness or civilization building, but one was when Olmec the Green came up, and in a clear reference for Tolkien, they're trying to figure out what would be the best types of crops to plant in order to keep his burgeoning village growing and everything, and then you just have a 2-minute scenes where they're just looking around each other, blowing smoke rings and talking about potatoes in a true Samwise way. And I just wound up cracking up at it because it was so unexpected, but then just the humor was injected directly into it.
Potatoes.
And these little moments are great. The second one that I really enjoyed was when Penny finally came to visit Men in his new kingdom, and they're looking over the irrigation that is happening with this new magical kingdom and how Olmec's trying to better treat the crops. And during with Penny is trying to explain the intricacies that his wife now has to face. While he may be the most powerful lord in the local area, his wife has to do with the social standings. So in true male-female difference fashion, Men's hyper-focused in on the mechanics of the irrigation happening, while Penny has to explain the social standing and the equally complex intricacies that is, the female version of court, and how despite them having power, throwing a party is just an equally important part for them to establish their kingdom. He's just completely missing the point while he's hyper-focused in on the irrigation mechanical stuff, while Penny is going on and on about social standing and just how this is such a big deal and he needs to really have Alias back. While all this is happening, they're slaying dragons, they're establishing orders, they are trying to bring the Magocracy back into fruition and deal with so many different existential crises at the same time, so that there was time to actually interject these little scenes and this humor into this book, I thought was a magnificent touch. Now, getting into the series spoilers themselves, if you have only read up to this point, skip to the end. I'll have timestamps leading to my overall conclusion and wrap up, but there's a lot that happens here that will ruin the rest of the series, so don't spoil it. One of the most interesting things about this reread that I have noticed is knowing about men's compulsion. So early on in the series, when he receives help for the Alcalalon in book 1, we do know that Men gets a compulsion laid upon him where he feels the need to take full-on responsibility for the fight against Shrule because someone has to. So in this book, I think that really manifests to why he becomes such a good lord. And there is a question that, you would have to ask yourself, would he have been the same type of person if he didn't have it? I think Men at his heart is still like a good, responsible person, but in this book you see him going above and beyond for the people when Sire K over, and he makes a lot of decisions that maybe he would have made it regardless, but with that compulsion for him wanting to take responsibility from everything, it's very interesting watching that and having that question in the back of your head. Would he have made these same choices without the outside interference that was that mind compulsion? And the other fun part too is we know that there will be a big conflict that will happen where they finally have to deal with what happens with Rogue Mages with Erionite, Isserley and Dunslin. We are seeing like the secrets build up. Men learns that Isserley has his child. Dunslin is starting to go on a rampage. He's starting to, conquer the nearby lords around him and retaking land. And you're seeing these conflicts quietly build up in the background while we're focused on the civilization building in this book. The Order of the Dragons. Quietly in the background, we're seeing these dark heads kind of loom in and closed, and that was a really kind of cool thing to see. Going back over the Snowstone and seeing just all the little pieces mentioned on there, there are actually a few little bits of things that I missed on that first time, the reason that the blizzard even happened in the first place was because it was rolling out the Undra, already supercharging it with kind of magic to begin with. So it was very cool going back into this because this is such a pivotal plot point. It brings the sea folk into there. It's one of the reasons why the humans have an advantage, or even it can stay afloat. The necromantic Alcalalon that will be coming on there. Just so many things that you won't see paid off for 3 or 4 books. It was just really cool diving back in there. And now I've gone back in this reread, I've just been blown away by how many little secrets that have been hidden in there and just how far out some of this has been outlined for. And in here we start seeing more setup. In the last book we start to see the first hints of the Forsaken with a general warning from General Hotarian, and now we're starting to see that start to build up a little steam. We don't really know about them, but we know they were powerful, and as we're starting to set up these mysteries and dive into it more, we start to see more cracks in the Alcalalon. One thing that I mentioned in my Spellmonger's Honeymoon is that you're starting to see early on these signs of warning that hey, what do you mean the humans would make a great servitor race if they weren't so headstrong? You're seeing how the Alcalalon treats the other type of folk around them, and how there definitely is a clear superiority complex with them, and how there are a lot of people that are being trained, or the culture is for them to serve the Alcalalon. So between the introduction of the politics where they're trying to make the council a distraction and use the humans to buy time, and all these little pieces that are being set up, later on in the books we find some giant bombshells about how the Alcalalon have just trying to buy time, let the humans take the blow, even though this is their mess that they made, and just so they can escape the planet. It's these seeds are been planted so early. It's seeing that early hints of betrayal of Perwyn, and just how are some things that happen, and humanity was way more the Magocracy. Before that, there was Perwyn. They were standing toe-to-toe with the Alcalalon, but through treachery and trickery, we're seeing there are some very, very, very big cracks in the foundation of any alliance that they would have with the Alcalalon. Now, this will build up a lot more and more as we get through the books, but just seeing it laid this early in book 2.5 and Magelord, it's just been kind of a blast to see all these little pieces set up this early on. But welcome back to my not ruining the series spoiler section. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. It was a lot of fun to get through. A lot of stuff was set up and happening, and at this point, I think if you finish this book, you'll know whether or not you like Harry Mangor. Moving into the next book, Knights Magi, we start to see those jump off into different directions and different genres. So if you liked up to here, next books are going to focus on other characters, and that will be something you see further on down the series, where you'll have a lot of men, a lot of action, a lot of this, but then because the world gets so big and expansive, you'll start to see kind of weird timeline stuff, or you'll see the world get expanded through other ways, because if you just focused on men this whole time, I think it would get stale and he would get too powerful. So instead, taking these aspects to explore different characters, some of the different spots. You can't have one character everywhere all the time. Being able to see instead what happens with his apprentices is, I personally had a great time with it, but that is something to be aware of. I'll talk more about that in my next review. Hopefully I can get to Knights Magi this month, but check out my TBR. That's on my bonus one. So hopefully I get through everything I had planned and I can start that book again. Overall, like, I mean, I've been pretty clear from the beginning. I'm a huge fan of the series. Mind blowing that this is done like as an indie author just for the sheer continuity. Huge fan. It's cool to see how active Terry is with his community. I'll link down his blog post down below if you want to check out more of his stuff directly. Just found out that there was a Discord called the Ghost Rock. I am terrible about using Discord, so I'm not active on it or really have done anything with it. But if you enjoy this and you're looking for a community of other people, you know, there are a bunch of places where people are congregating and putting stuff together. But I'm super excited to keep going on. I want to get completely caught up with the series by the end of the year. I probably won't be, just because now we're getting on to like 6 or 7 series I'm trying to finish, and I generally get about like 60 or 70 books in a year, and that's not including me having to edit and do everything, so I need to get a count of where I'm at now, but you can fully expect me to continue down this and build out into the future. Once I get caught up with the Spellmonger and I will be waiting for the releases, I will start doing different videos about like how the magic system works, even though it's a soft magic system, diving into, you know, the gods, the lore, some of the history, the political alliance. There is fertile ground here, and I don't see a lot of people making content around this, and there are a couple. I have talked about it before, you know, David Green. I've seen a couple one-off people cover Spellmonger book 1, but I'm hoping the series grows. I have a lot of fun with it, and I will continue to like recommend it out to people. So hopefully we can get more traction, more people talk about it, because it's a very fun series to talk about. But thank you guys for sticking around and checking this video out. I appreciate the time, and you know, this was a lot of fun to do. So maybe in my next videos, I might start mixing in some like different type of film things. I have a lot of fun doing these, so I'm excited to continue on. As always, hope you guys enjoyed, and take it easy.